Support for current conversations is provided by Outreach Video and Media Services, University of Oklahoma Outreach, and World Literature Today. Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm RC Davis-Undiano. Today's show is a special one-hour broadcast dedicated to the important topic of Daca, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This is the federal program that has allowed the children of the undocumented to remain in the U.S. for extended periods. President Trump recently signaled the possible end of this program. We will be looking at the political background for Daca, how it works, its social impact, what is good and possibly bad about it economically, and its likelihood to be around in the future. To fill out this picture about Daca, we have a distinguished panel of experts who have overseen Daca students at two major universities, the University of Oregon and the University of Oklahoma. We have Dr. Jane Irungu, Executive Director of the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies at the University of Oklahoma. She also worked as an administrator overseeing Daca students at the University of Oregon. We have Jessica Martinez-Brooks, Director of Diversity Enrichment Programs at the University of Oklahoma and advisor to many Daca students. And last, we have Nima Zecavati, Immigration Counsel and International Faculty and Staff Services Director at the University of Oklahoma. I want to welcome everybody to the show. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you. Nima, you're an attorney, could you start us out and maybe tell us what Daca is exactly? I'm sure that a lot of people hear that term and have a vague idea, but don't really know what it is and how it functions.
Sure. So Daca stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It was a program that was created in 2012 by President Obama via an executive action. It was in response to assisting the children of the undocumented so that they could be protected from deportation. And so it's deferred action from deportation. In addition to that, it provided them with a benefit of being able to get a work permit. And so that opened up the door for them to be able to get a driver's license and a social security number.
If there's a young person here who has grown up here and wants to contribute to this society, wants to maybe start a business that will create jobs for other folks who are looking for work, that's the right thing to do.
The program was quite successful. There were over 800,000 applicants approved for the Daca program and over 7,500 approved in the state of Oklahoma.
Weren't there about 1,760,000, something like that, eligible for it?
There were many more eligible, but they didn't all qualify for the criteria.
Okay.
And so the program was very successful until we got to 2017. On September 5th of this year, President Trump announced that he was rescinding the Daca program and that he would put a 6-month window in which the program would be completely sunsetted on March 5th, 2018.
Over forever on that date.
Over forever unless there is any kind of immigration reform to provide a permanent solution to the problem.
So you said this was an executive order that came from President Obama. That's an important part of this. That means it was easier to get in place and easier to get rid of, right?
Sure, absolutely. For years, they had submitted bills to address this issue of the Dreamers. And every year it would fail to pass through Congress. And President Obama even said back at that time, I just want something on my desk and I will sign it. But unfortunately, none of the bills ever got through to his desk. And so because of that, he really had no choice but to issue an executive order to address the problem.
And I guess there were issues brought up almost immediately about the constitutionality. Can you say anything about that?
Sure. You know,
Standing.
there has been, you know, many claims that the president exceeded his constitutional authority in passing DACA. But the bottom line is that both Republican and Democratic presidents throughout the years have used executive action to address immigration issues.
Now, I'm running just a little bit ahead of what we're talking about. I'm not sure we need to get into this, but I'll bring it up briefly. There was also what was it called, DACA, but there was a parent. Dapa. And that was a kind of flashpoint. Didn't it get challenged in court when it looked like it was going to be a much larger?
So there was something that was called DAPA that stood for Deferred Action for Parents. And the Dapa case was challenged by the state of Texas. And it did go all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court split on it. At that time, there was only 8 justices, so it split 4-4. And so the case was sent back to the appellate level.
When the Supreme Court is tied, it's the lower court.
It goes back to the lower court. And the lower court had actually ruled against DAPA. They had found that it didn't go through the correct Administrative Procedures Acts. And so they ruled against it and held it to be unconstitutional.
Okay. I want to get this whole issue of DACA out of the abstract just a little bit. Could you and maybe Jessica and Jane please jump in? What's it like for people to apply for DACA? I've actually been to the website myself, but maybe you could, what would people see when they get there? What's the attitude conveyed in the site? What kind of questions come up?
You know, there's a lot of ways that the federal government has, of course, made it complicated there's nothing simple about applying for DACA. And whenever you first have to meet all these minimum requirements, right? So you had to have been under the 31 on June 15th, 2012. And you have to maintain continuous presence in the United States since 2007, right, Nima? And then, you know, once you get all of your documentation in order and then you're ready to apply on the application, then it's just this terminology and just different questions that they're asking you that just really make you feel like, am I doing this right? Because if you do it wrong, it's getting rejected. And so I think the whole process is extremely stressful. It is a great benefit to several students, and many students were looking forward to having DACA when they turned 16 to get their driver's license. And so now when I think about all of the anguish that this has caused a lot of our students, you know, it's worrying to me. Just their mental health to me is just something that I worry about, especially for our students at the University of Oklahoma.
It seemed to me that there were some strange questions too. There was a question about body weight at one point, and a lot of warnings. If you get this wrong, it's over, you won't get it. It feels like you're in the criminal justice system. It doesn't feel friendly.
I think what happens with the immigration system as a whole is stressful because there's always a warning. If you do this, this is going to happen. But particularly for DACA students, they are also putting information on those forms that concerns their parents, where they live, their addresses. So they are getting out of the shadows, but it's so vulnerable to them because their parents' names are also there, maybe even their siblings. So it's like you've come out of hiding and you're dragging your whole family with you. So what happens to that information? They worry about that. And that is why Jessica is saying there is some anguish to it as you complete it. And maybe also to mention, as Nima was saying, the program is ending, but for renewals, it actually ended yesterday, October 5th. So as of yesterday, there are no more renewals, and yet your information is out there.
You do this with the hope that you're actually going to get the DACA certification, but you could get turned down. In the meantime, as you said, you've made yourself very vulnerable.
Exactly.
I'd like to keep going in the direction of taking this out of the abstract. Could you give us some, maybe Jane, you could jump in on this, and Jessica, maybe some real life instances that you remember where people children of the undocumented have maybe benefited or not. Any stories that that would really tell us a lot about how this has worked?
So I work with a lot of our high school seniors, and I recruit specifically in the state of Oklahoma. And what I have seen most is that ability to work in order to pay tuition and fees. And that has been their way of funding college. And when you take that away from them, that is extremely stressful. So I was always so pleased that, we have DACA students working all over campus, and they have jobs that are, one, giving them the ability to pay their tuition and fees, because otherwise they would not have that ability. When you think about it, DACA's students do not qualify for federal aid, so they can't submit a FAFSA. They don't qualify for state aid. Oklahoma legislation back in 2006, Nima, 2007,
2007.
House Bill 1804, no longer allowed state aid to go to undocumented students. Now the one good thing about the state of Oklahoma, not just one good thing about the state of Oklahoma, but for the undocumented students is that they can qualify for in-state tuition. So as long as they've filled out their affidavit of intent, they can at least qualify for resident level tuition. Even though they've been here, some of them, 2 and 3 years old and have gone to Oklahoma City public schools, Tulsa public schools, wherever it may be, that alone allowed them to still maintain that level of tuition. So that was good.
So you've seen lots of instances where actual students are, in some sense, saved, or at least for the moment, by this. I mean, a really good outcome.
Saved, I think, is a good word, but I think the better word is that they're able to show what their hard work looks like and get rewarded for it, right? So whenever we're talking about DACA students, they are some of the best and the brightest that I work with in high schools. Some of them were valedictorians this year, and typically the tuition waiver that I would offer a valedictorian coming out of a high school, I wasn't allowed to offer it to that student. And so this student is sometimes working 2 and 3 jobs to maintain just their bursar bill, right? And so I think what our students have done an amazing job, and Jane, you probably worked with a number of students at University of Oregon as well, is just their level of hustle that they have. They are always hardworking, always, there's a job in housing and food, and then they're working off campus as well. They've got to maintain that level of income in order to support not only what they're doing at college, but sometimes their family members as well.
Yeah, Jane.
It's also the ability to live without the kind of anguish that a non-documented person lives with. You carry around this weight, but once you get DACA, even something we take for granted, like driving, they are able to drive around, and maybe they are the only person in their household that is allowed to drive. So they have to go grocery shopping with their parents. They have to take their kids to the doctors while still maintaining school and work. Now, when all this is taken away, we are taking away a person in the family who actually is helping that family to live like, quote unquote, a normal family. So it's the simplest of things.
Things that other people take for granted.
Exactly. It's opening a bank account, for example.
Yeah.
It's feeling like you are a teenager. You can actually do what teenagers do, and taking away from it, you're taking away part of them.
And I've seen a lot of students not find out that they're not U.S. citizens until they go and want to get their driver's license. And then their parents have to have this very uncomfortable discussion with them. No, you're undocumented, we're undocumented. We came here when you were very little. And so they just didn't know. And there was something they had looked forward to, like the rest of their classmates that are doing. And that it kind of brings me back to that level of anxiety for these kids.
My guess is, I'm just guessing, that you've probably both seen just heartbreaking cases where because of a birthday falling a day before or a day after, somebody is so close, but they don't qualify. And that must just be a nightmare.
It is heartbreaking working with these students. I mean, I remember one of my students who literally was just weeping because we could not afford the grant that he was looking for. I mean, we had small grants for the students, But given that they don't have federal aid, and the state may have some grants, especially in Oregon, there was some grants towards undocumented students, but they're hardly enough. Tuition is so high in all of our public and private colleges. So it is not being able to be who they want to be or to realize their full potential because of all these barriers along the way. But that being said, I have had students who have graduated, who are DACA students. They graduated, and because they had their work authorization, they were actually able to work. They are working in the school systems, they are in the banks, they are in the community. So we have seen success stories too, but it doesn't go without a lot of heart, a lot of pain, a lot of anguish.
Yeah, it sounds like, though, it's a kind of adversarial system, applying for DACA to begin with, and then if you get a traffic ticket or screw up in some way, it could be revoked. But it sounds like you two, who've seen a lot of actual students and how it plays on the ground with them, it sounds like on the whole, you would give it, it's been a good thing.
It's been a very, very good thing.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in, we are talking about DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So we have a panel of experts here. Nima, could you take us back a little bit? Most of us assume that something like DACA just appears out of the blue, just a good idea. But in the world of law, it seems like there are precedents to most things, or they probably don't happen if there isn't some precedent. Can you try to fill in a little bit? Are there precedents for DACA? Was there anything that led up to it?
Sure. So, DACA was created via an executive action, and there have been more than 39 executive actions passed by presidents since 1957. I don't want to go into all of them, but just a few of them. President Kennedy in the early 60s implemented a program to help Cuban refugees that were fleeing the Castro regime. In the 70s, in the mid-70s, President Ford created a program through executive action to assist Vietnamese that were fleeing the fall of Saigon. In the middle 80s, in 1987, President Reagan implemented an executive action to help the minors of the folks that benefited from the 1986 Immigration and Reform Control Act. And it goes on and on and on.
Isn't there the famous 1986 amnesty for the undocumented, and 3 million people benefited
Sure,
from
the
that?
1986 Immigration and Reform Control Act, which they call the Amnesty,
Yeah,
was actually legislation. And so that wasn't
right.
necessarily an executive action, but right after that, in 1987, President Reagan did issue an executive action to fill in some of the holes in which the 1986 law did not address the minors of the folks that benefited from the 1986 Immigration and Reform Control Act.
Is that the 1986 Reagan amnesty, is that generally considered a success? How do people look back and view that?
It really depends on who you ask. I personally think it was something that was beneficial for the American society at the time. There were a large number of folks that were in the country and documented. They weren't in the system, and we didn't really know what to do with them. And so with the 1986 Immigration and Reform Control Act helped address that issue to help bring them out of the shadows, give them a permanent status, and help them assimilate into the U.S. culture. And so I don't see any negative thing about the 1986 law.
Somebody coming on the scene right now might wonder, though, because while that was the executive order of a Republican president, the A word, amnesty, has become the third rail. I mean, people just don't want to ever mention it. Just like a path to citizenship. Oh, no, we can't do amnesty. And yet that's exactly what it was about.
Sure. I mean, they call it amnesty, but in reality, there were criteria for that also. And so there were background checks. They, had to meet criteria in which, in some cases they had to go out of the country and come back in. And so that wasn't an easy process either. But in the end, it really, I think, helped decrease that population of undocumented folks in the United States to get assimilated into the U.S. so they could be able to get a job, so they could
Right.
go to school, so they could become a lawyer, so they could become a doctor.
Jessica, let me direct this to you. From a kind of sociological perspective, and it's not generally what we're talking about today, but this is kind of interesting. I think people look at President Obama's action to protect the children of the undocumented as a kind thing. And I think that's what you two, we've all said. It really has played that way. But it's got to be kind of a mixed message because President Obama was also the deporter in chief. He deported more people than anyone else, which suggests that he wasn't that receptive in some ways to the Latino community and especially to Mexican Americans. And yet there was this kind of act of compassion and kindness. How do we understand that? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think prior to President Obama, there was no real order of priority deportations. So, Nima, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was just whoever, if you were undocumented, then you needed to go back. That wasn't the criminal who's got a felony or firearms conviction. It was just if you were found undocumented, then you're going back. And I think he struggled to, really try and secure the border. I mean, that was his thing. I want to secure the border in order to really pass DREAM Act legislation. So he could say that we have secured the border, we have done this. I mean, and from what he did in 2012, that took tremendous guts for you to come through. I mean, there's been similar executive orders in the past, but that level was unprecedented.
So I think you're kind of saying what I suspected. In other words, by being deporter in chief, that gave him credibility in a certain way so that he could do something that was more directly beneficial to the community because he could say, look, I'm honoring the border, I'm protecting the border and making sure that people don't come across. In fact, now there's a net loss. There are more people going to Mexico than there are coming across. So in some ways that succeeded.
And he also came through, and Nima, I forgot what that memo was, but he came through and ranked who should be deported. So this is priority number 1, and this is priority 2. So he did that even before the executive order took place. But yes, he tried to really get Congress to come together to pass the DREAM Act legislation. And so, like I said, it was unprecedented what he did and very beneficial to all the students that we work with.
Okay, so you can't get in a discussion like this, having almost anything to do with immigration, without hearing the phrasing, the broken immigration system, the broken immigration system. Jane, can you help us on that? I mean, what's broken about, how does the immigration system work? And how is it broken? Why does everybody agree, right and left, that it needs to be changed and needs to be reformed?
I think broken is the layman's way of trying to explain a very complicated system. It's broken because it's flawed. It's broken because it's complicated. It's broken because, like Nima was saying, sometimes you feel like there is no order. You don't know where to go. There's multiple visas, there's multiple forms. And especially for the 11 million undocumented, they really don't know what next. What do they do? Or for an international student who misses class for a month because maybe something happened out of their control, then they don't even know what next. So it is a system that weighs heavily, especially on immigrants. And it's not just immigrants from Mexico. It is all immigrants. So that is why they say it's broken, because they really don't see a consistency or a path to becoming legal residents or even citizens, or what is it I can do to actually be accepted as a resident here who can actually live a normal life. Nobody is offering that path. And that is why you hear it's broken. And that is why probably President Obama was trying to do something about it. Let's focus on the young people who are going to be leaders of tomorrow. And in doing that, we are actually protecting our communities. Let us deport those who have criminal records. In doing that, we are also protecting our communities.
There's so few issues that the right and left agree on and end up saying the same thing. And this is one where they seem to. So I think it's worth staying on it just a moment. So does everybody agree that the immigration system is broken because it's too complicated? I think you said that. Inconsistent in terms of the results. My guess is at some point we probably hit some disagreement. My guess is that people on the far right would like it to be more forbidding so that fewer people come in. My guess is that people on the far left think it's broken because it should be more encouraging, more friendly. Was that, do you think
The
that's right?
imagery that the far right has is that everyone is jumping across or over the wall. And that is not true.
It's just not true.
It's
Yeah.
just not true. There are people from Africa, Eastern Europe, Asia, who come in, and once their paperwork hits a snag in one way or the other, even refugees and others, then they don't have a systematic and a quick way of correcting that. So that makes it a broken system.
And there's such a backlog right now, especially for family-based immigration. I mean, you're waiting 25 and 30 years to process an application. So, I mean, how is that going to be beneficial for you to wait in Mexico for a 25, 30-year backlog? By the time you're a retiree, you're going to come here and retire with benefits? I would think you would want the younger person who's working, who is contributing to taxes. Those are the people that we want. And so that's, I think, why President Obama focused on doing something for the Dreamers, because they are such a benefit to this society. And hopefully, you know, you recognize that with some action, and hopefully our Congress will do something about it soon in order to fix at least that portion. But the entire immigration system, just due to the backlog, due to the types of visas there are, the limited amount of visas that there are, there's just not a lot of ways to regulate your status.
Nima, what were you going to say?
Sure. So, you know, I get the question of, well, why don't Dreamers just obtain their green card or their citizenship? I get that all the time. And the fact is that there are no ways for them to obtain their green card or their citizenship. That's why they say the system is broken. There are these backlogs. And when folks are in these backlogs, they're not necessarily in legal status. And so they have to wait 20, 25 years in the family-based system. And the employment-based immigration system, it's even worse. You have some categories, for example, for India, in which folks have to wait, they're saying maybe 50 to 60 years to get a green card. So when you talk about a broken immigration system, it deals with the family-based immigration system, and it also deals with the employment-based immigration system.
You know, I've done some writing about Mexican-American literature in the 40s and the 50s, and the question of the undocumented just never comes up there because there was a guest worker program and there weren't any illegals. I mean, we know from our own history there are ways that this can work a lot better than it does right now.
But they're not willing to do it. They're not willing. Congress is, they don't have the will to come together and, you know, come up with a comprehensive immigration reform.
There would have to be a will to actually make a change.
There will have to be.
Like, this is really happening. I can't believe this is really happening. I'm actually going to have a chance to get a job and to actually pursue my dream. I don't know if I'm going to be able to continue after my permit expires here in the United States. I love my job, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to have it after next year. I'm not sure what's going to happen with me anymore.
As a senior at OSU, I have offers from employers now with my career job, and this is definitely something that is affecting my future.
If you're just joining the show today, we're talking about DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and we have a distinguished panel of legal experts and university administrators helping us understand this very important topic. Maybe we could talk about the impact, because we hear about this all the time, that the existence of DACA certified people has on jobs, job availability in the US. I heard Jeff Sessions say in front of a press conference that DACA folks are taking jobs from people that are already here, and that's a bad thing, and one of the reasons this program should be discontinued. Jessica, where do you?
And everything that I've read, that is absolutely untrue. So what I have seen is that a lot of these students, particularly at OU, but students who are coming out of high school, they are seeking some type of education and forms of higher education. So many of them are still enrolled in school right now, and they're seeking high-level positions. They're looking for internships with engineering. So I believe the population that Jeff Sessions was referring to was more low-skilled workers, and I'm, certain. He specifically mentioned certain demographics as well, and all of the economists and the reports that are coming out are saying that is just completely not true.
The number of people that are gainfully employed, the impact paying taxes, the list goes on and on and on. It seems to really go the other way. Jane, what were you going to say?
And that is true. The most recent articles written on this indicate that if we lose DACA, then the country will be losing about $240 billion over the next 10 years from the economic output of folks who have DACA. So like Jessica is saying, it is completely untrue that it's a negative impact. It is going to have a negative economic impact for the country. And some of these unskilled labor that they are talking about, if we let those folks working in those fields go, 100%, there's going to be an issue, especially in the South and other in the West, where we have farms. Most of this is done by immigrants, and some of them are undocumented. And you have seen or heard from farmers that Americans don't want to go to the field. They don't last one day picking oranges or picking grapes. So it is completely untrue.
Immigrants, we get the job done. That's a line from Hamlet on Broadway right now. So there have been, I think, a lot of studies, just as you're saying, and surprise, people working, paying taxes seems to benefit everybody. The rising tides raises all boats. It's all of the indications are just the opposite of what Jeff Sessions seems to say.
Right. They are paying taxes. They are paying into Medicare. They are paying into Social Security. So it's not like they are being a negative effect. They are a positive effect because they are paying into the system. If you remove their authorization to work, then actually you'll be stretching the system, because then they'll be using the system without paying into the system.
And I think just in Oklahoma alone, we have about 100,000 undocumented people in the state, and it would cost us, I believe, $57 million a year, just if they lost that DACA status.
Right.
So,
well, the two arguments I hear most of the time against DACA status and against more vigorous immigration is the one we're talking about. The economic impact will be bad, and economists tell us again and again that's false. The other argument I hear is the violence that they bring with them. Any thoughts about that? I've actually seen some studies, but let me get you in on this.
When DACA folks go through the process, they are screened. There is a background check that's ran on them. And so I haven't really heard any substantial statistics on crime being committed by DACA beneficiaries. So I don't think that that's necessarily an issue.
because if they did have a felony, they would lose their status. And even if they had a significant misdemeanor, a DUI, an arrest for domestic violence, firearms, illegal firearm possession, all of those would automatically revoke that status.
What I've read is that research done into the behavior of immigrants in general tells us that their incidence of committing any kind of crime at all is far below the national average. And I think about a couple of those cases. There was a girl that was just brutally killed in San Francisco. It was about a year and a half ago, and she was killed by a Mexican-American whose status had been revoked, and I think he was illegal at that point, and people pointed to this incident and said, look, here's what happens when we don't have security at the border. It was one instance. The numbers do not support that kind of thing is happening as a wave or anything at all.
RC, it's always easier to point at the foreigner. It's always easier to point at somebody we don't want among us. But even most recently, what has happened, or what happened in Las Vegas, that was not an immigrant. That was
No.
an American citizen. It was not even a minority person. So when you have persons that you don't want in your society, it's very easy to point at them. And we are not saying that the life of that young woman wasn't valuable. It was valuable. But then we have to look at the big picture. How many DACA students have been convicted of these violent crimes? So we really have to put everybody in a kind of light that some of these statistics that are put out there are wrong.
I think the statistics tend to point in the direction that we're saying. I mean, all the studies have said that immigrants are not really committing crimes at any appreciable level. Okay, so if there's not a real issue of violation of the law, and there is not really an issue of economic deprivation to people that are already here, and in terms of border security, we know that if there's a wall, it's mainly going to be walling people into the United States because the flow is back to Mexico. There are very few Mexicans coming into the country now. If we remove all of these reasons for being super vigilant about immigration and DACA, what does that leave us with? It sounds like a kind of obsession in the country where there are no real issues here. Any thoughts about that, Nima?
Well, President Trump ran on a platform of canceling DACA and even reducing legal immigration. And he has a base that expects him to follow through on those promises.
Anyone who has entered the United States illegally is subject to deportation. That is what it means to have laws and to have a country.
There were 10 states that were led by Texas that sent President Trump an ultimatum letter that he should cancel the DACA program or that they would initiate legal action. And, you know, in the end, it seems that, you know, the Trump administration buckled and they canceled the DACA program on the last day of the ultimatum, which was September 5th.
So are we talking about demagoguery here? You know, these are campaign promises that worked for his base, and we're cooking up reasons to say that these changes have to be made and we have to keep DACA students out. Is it people nervous about the character of the country changing? Is there an underlying white nationalism trying to protect itself? What's going on here?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of everything that you just said. Immigration is an emotional topic, and everybody has an emotional and passionate response typically to it. This is not usually a piece of legislation that somebody would feel lukewarm about. So you're either really, really for it or you're really, really against it. And both parties, I mean, even in both parties, so you have the Democrat Party who typically favors some type of immigration reform, but also on the Republican side, there are people who are introducing legislation right now that are, you know, in favor of doing something for the Dreamers. But you also have on the Democrat Party the unions who feel like sometimes that undocumented workers drive wages down and that impacts some of their union workers. So even within the party itself, each party, it's very split in who is going to favor some type of reform and what type that might look like and how it might impact the organizations that they represent.
You know, I think there's even a little more than you're saying to the union issue. There were times in the past where American unions had a very important educational function to inform their membership of political issues that would be really pertinent to the steel workers or mine workers or whatever, and then helping workers identify candidates that could really serve those issues. As unions have been dialed back over the last 20 and 30 years, and that educational function has disappeared almost entirely. A lot of workers are just kind of twisting out there. They don't have good information, and they are subject to demagoguery and hearing slogans instead of actual information about what's happening in the country.
Right. And I go back to the social cultural piece about it. I think there is a fear in a section of the population that there's such a hike in folks who are minorities coming from other countries, and you're not learning our culture, you're not assimilating. We have had incidences in shopping centers where people are asked to go 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 to your country or speak
Go back home.
English, go back home. I think there's a section of the society, the American society, that feels almost like they're being invaded by foreigners, and they're so resentful about it that they are not even hiding it. But there is some kind of base of racism, to be honest with you. They feel like these folks don't belong here. Why are they here? And what is not being told is what these folks are bringing that is actually good for the society. The diversity of our society, the diversity of our schools, our economic benefits. So I feel like the negative stories get told, and some of our leaders heighten that by saying, oh, they're rapists or they're whatever. And
And the facts aren't there. to
and the
support that.
facts aren't there. So I do feel that resentment, and it hasn't helped in the last 1.5 years, where we are talking about, or we'll send them back home.
So you're saying that in a period of enormous cultural, social change as we're in right now, globally that's happening, it's a time of high stress, and it's very frightening to people. So there's a lot of anxiety, particularly among white communities,
Right.
about losing their majority status. And it's tempting to identify outsiders who they perceive as outsiders, people of color, and say they must somehow be the cause of this because I couldn't be causing it. And so we get these kind of false arguments about the damage that immigrants are doing, when in fact the evidence points the other way. I mean, it's really white anxiety.
You know, after 9/11, I think the socio-cultural sense of many people changed, that, oh, this happened, and by the way, these folks were from these countries. And then you saw the backlash against Muslims, but then you now also see the backlash against all immigrants. I think we tend to think it's just Mexicans, but it's all immigrants. So there is that fear from that base, but some of the facts out there are really not true. Because the people who have died after 9/11, and I'm not saying that their lives are not valuable, most of those deaths have been caused by American citizens.
Right, right. I want to tell our audience, in case they're just joining the show, that we're talking about DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals today. We've got a distinguished panel of experts. I want to point out a kind of irony about what we're talking about. If we go back to the founders, Madison and Hamilton, in the Federalist Papers, and go back and read the Constitution, what the founders had in mind was a multicultural democracy. And there's one point where Madison in Federalist Paper number 10 says, I'm really worried about something, though. If this American idea succeeds and America becomes a very prosperous place, and maybe even affluent at some point, there's going to be the temptation of some communities to kind of fold their arms and say, this is ours. And anybody else is an invader, the enemy, this is our country. And he was really upset because he said, I don't know how we're going to prevent that. And he said, that will ruin the American idea of a multicultural democracy. And it sounds like we're making that argument here now, that Latinos, and that's the group we're talking about mainly today, are the culmination of the American idea of a multicultural democracy, not its destruction. I think the founders would be ashamed of us if they saw the arguments being made to keep Latinos out when their hopes ran exactly in the other direction. I think that's what we're...
I think that's true, and I think there's a feeling that if we could all speak the same language, if we could all act the same way, maybe would be safer, would be better. And I don't think that is how a multicultural society or a diverse society works.
Especially in a globalized world.
Especially in a global world. So if you want all of us to be similar, If you don't want to hear me speaking my other 3 languages and you're shutting me off, is that making me better? Is that making me feel like I want to be a good member of this society?
You know, David Brooks talks about this point, who's a Republican, by the way, and that sociologists have studied the amount of time it's taking Latinos to assimilate. They're not taking any longer than anyone else. And to learn English, to become part of the culture, to acculturate, et cetera, there's no difference. You know, I mean, again, it's people are assuming things that aren't based in facts. Let's get back to some just kind of practical issues ahead. Nima, what chance do you think there is that DACA in some sense will be renewed? It's on a 6 months life support system now. DACA renewals are going to happen? You see that on the horizon?
So President Trump has the ability to issue another executive action to bring back DACA before the expiration of March 5th, 2018. He's even recently tweeted that he plans to revisit the issue if Congress is not able to pass one of the bills. Whether he does that or not is really anybody's guess. Congress has the ability to address the issue permanently. There are numerous bills right now that are circulating. There's the DREAM Act, there's the RAC Act, there's the American Hope Act, there's the Succeed Act, there's the Bridge Act. All of these bills would provide some kind of a permanent fix to the problem. The DREAM Act is probably the one that has the most bipartisan support.
Is that the most comprehensive, too?
It has.
They're all very similar, I
They
think.
they all have different criteria, but it is one that allows our dreamers to obtain a green card in a shorter amount of time, in 8 years, if you consider that short. And I think the dreamer community as a whole would like to see a bill such as the DREAM Act push through.
Nima, let me ask you, you know, as an attorney, if you're looking at options on the table that could actually happen over the next year or several years, whatever, would renewal of DACA, I mean, how would that rank? I mean, would that be maybe too low of a bar? I mean, we maybe don't want DACA back. We want something better, something that's more comprehensive. I mean, how would you judge that?
So, you know, I think that DACA is something that was great, but it still leaves a lot of folks in this limbo, in a temporary status.
It does.
They can't go to medical school in a lot of cases because they're not eligible for a medical license. In a lot of cases, they're not eligible to get a law license. Many professions that require licenses, they're not able to go in and become doctors and lawyers. Cosmetologists. And so I think really if we could get a permanent solution in the form of, you know, the DREAM Act that would provide them a green card, permanent residency, I think that would really be best for everyone.
Yeah.
So we're talking about DACA today because that's what's on the table nationally, but we don't want to get too focused on DACA as if it's a good long-term solution when it really isn't.
No, it absolutely isn't, but it was a Band-Aid on what was a very serious problem for a lot of our young people. And that is what I am, you know, at least with this, the silver lining that I kept telling the students was maybe this is going to give Congress the oomph that they need to really get something done this time. And you see a number of the different pieces of legislation coming out right now, and all of them have this conditional permanent residency period. And if you stay out of trouble, then eventually you can apply for a legal permanent residency, which is your green card. And then at that point, once they become legal permanent residents, they can qualify for a number of things like state and federal aid. And that would be a great benefit to a lot of the students that I particularly work with in recruiting for higher education. So this whole and right now they can't apply for that state or federal aid. So I keep, you know, having to find workarounds, and I'm like, go apply for this outside scholarship, and trying to find different, you know, workarounds for them as far as outside scholarship funding goes, you know, private donors who want to help them. And these are really talented students who really deserve some type of recognition for their hard work that they have put into our educational systems. So I really have hope at the end of the day, and that something will happen, that Congress will take some action for this piece of legislation, for at least helping our dreamers in some
Right,
form or
and
fashion.
I think if it's comprehensive and not looking at DACA as an isolated program, but that it affects the families too, because you allow some to be documented and others to be undocumented, and they're in the same family. We have a lot of separation going on. We have a lot of families being broken, and that is impacting our society, and it's impacting not only the mental health of the families, but also the economic impact around it, the income.
If you have one parent who gets deported to Mexico, who
Right.
was an income earner and helping to support, even a U.S. citizen wife and kids sometimes, it makes a great impact on that family. Just one, being able to pay rent, pay their bills, pay electricity, all of that adds up, and you keep separating these families. And it's not just being deported back to Mexico, but it's, Guatemala, South America, all these places, Asia, all of these places are represented and are having direct impacts. And I go back to that mental health and that level of anxiety
Right.
that our students continually carry around with them. And I just can't imagine living like that all the time and being a good, upstanding citizen, doing community volunteer work, maintaining your classes, maintaining your GPA, because that's what I see these students are doing.
These are super students.
These
they
are
really
superstars.
are. Yeah.
And I can't say enough about them and their spirit that they carry with them.
One of the themes that I think has been really important in our discussion today, and this has come up on a lot of other shows we've done in Current Conversations in relation to a lot of other complex social issues, that there seems to be this drift in American culture away from information-based decision-making. Because if we were to confine ourselves or just even get interested in information-based decision-making here, we would want to have as many of these super students in the culture as we can, and every economic and sociological study says that their impact is amazing and makes the country a better version of itself, but that doesn't seem, information-based decision-making doesn't seem to be what's prevailing. If there were going to be reforms over the next couple of years in the immigration legislation, what would be most important to you that you would want to see changed?
I think that, of course, I would like to see the Dreamer issue addressed, and I'm hopeful that a bill like the DREAM Act could be passed. But I'm also hopeful that we can reform the employment-based immigration system. There are many companies out there that are not able to hire the best and brightest from all over the world because they're limited by an immigration system that doesn't have enough visa numbers to bring in those folks. But unfortunately, what I'm seeing right now from the Trump administration is the exact opposite. Just recently, they lowered the annual refugee count to 45,000 per year, which is the lowest in the history of that program. And so they have also indicated, a desire to look at reducing the employment-based immigration system
And the green
maybe
card,
even
too.
eliminating some of the visa
Yeah.
categories that we use to bring the best and brightest physicians, researchers, and scientists, such as the H-1B visa, which would again be the complete opposite of what we need to do to be able to compete globally with countries like Canada, which are opening up their borders and making the immigration system more inviting.
So we need smart decision-making as we bring these reforms on board, not demagoguery.
Right.
Again, information-based decision-making.
And we need something that's broad, that is dealing with not just one section of the immigrants, but we have 11 million undocumented immigrants. What are we going to do so that we make sure that this group of immigrants,
Right.
there is some kind of systematic and permanent solution? Because right now they live in limbo.
They're
And we are-
there, it's a fact, and their impact could be very, very
Right,
positive.
and some of them have lived here for 30 years, and all of a sudden now they're getting deported because they ran a red light, or maybe they have a parking ticket.
Right.
That is not sustainable. We are going to lose more money deporting them than finding a way to keep them here.
Okay, we've got just a little bit over a minute left. We have a feature on the show we call the Fearless Forecast, and I'm sure you look into the future all the time, so this will be a moment to kind of test what you see there. Maybe we could go around. I'd like to get a quick take from each one of you. Something you think will happen in the next 5 years, good or bad, that will have an impact, good or bad, on the world of immigration in the U.S. that we're talking about.
Well, as much as I would like to hope that we would have some type of comprehensive immigration reform, the way Congress is right now, I just can't see that happening. Right now, we're not even able to push, your own party can't agree on what going forward that might look like. So as much as a good thing that I would like to see comprehensive immigration reform, I don't see that happening, which is a bad thing. But the good thing is I do hope that this administration and this Congress addresses our dreamers. And
Okay.
so I see that as a good thing.
In action in one area, but you hope they'll address the
Yes.
dreamers. Jane?
I actually have a lot of hope that before March of 2018, that our president is going to say, by the way, I changed my mind, let them stay. And because he has said he has compassion for them. So I hope he makes good of that word. But beyond that, I also want Congress to see it and actually come up with something that's going to work, not only for the dreamers, but for H-1Bs and for other folks who want to stay here and be legal and just live a normal
We
life.
need a lot more than just DACA.
We need a lot more than
Yeah.
just DACA.
Yeah.
And I want to see the families keep being kept together and not separated.
Okay, Nima?
I have to agree with Jessica. I also don't see any kind of comprehensive immigration reform being passed in the next 5 years. There are just too many advisors that are surrounding President Trump that are on the other side of the aisle. But I do agree with Jessica that the one piece that might be pushed through, that might be a positive thing, is the DREAM Act might finally be passed after decades of being brought up in Congress.
Okay, your predictions are out there. People will see if they come true or not. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Join us next time for more Current Conversations.